Hello, Black Hat. Welcome to the President's Cup Cyber Competition, finding the best cyber talent in the federal government. I'm Harry Mourtos. I'm an advisor to the Executive Assistant Director for Cybersecurity at the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency at the Department of Homeland Security. And this is...
I'm Matt Kaar. I'm the project lead for President's Cup from the Software Engineering Institute at Carnegie Mellon University, where I also serve as an adjunct instructor at the Information Networking Institute.
So let's talk about the President's Cup. This came about as a result of Executive Order 13870, the America's Cyber Workforce Executive Order, and it tasked the Department of Homeland Security with developing a plan in 90 days to run a cybersecurity competition to identify, challenge, and reward the best cyber talent in the federal government by the end of December, by December 31st, 2019. The competition was to include 10 different functional areas that would be tested. There was to be a team and individual component of the competition, which would be open to federal civilian employees as well as uniformed service members. Although it did task us with developing the plan to identify ways to include non-federal participants as either observers or competitors. It also tasked us with identifying ways to incentivize agencies to identify their best cyber talent to participate. For this competition, especially given the short timelines, we were only able to announce the competition 3 weeks before we launched our first qualifying round. We knew we had to open it up as wide as possible. So our criteria for running this competition, it had to be as accessible as possible. It had to have minimum hardware software requirements to allow really anyone to participate, especially given we're targeting federal employees who may be participating during work hours. We don't want them downloading a bunch of vulnerable VMs to hack away at on their federal equipment. And it had to be able to be done remotely, particularly the qualifying rounds, in order to get down to the finalists. So with those criteria in mind, we developed our plan to do 2 qualifying rounds that would be completely remote, ending in a final round that would be in person, and we would put a unique twist on that, which we'll talk about a little bit later. The down selects for the qualifiers were based on performance in the rounds. For the individual competition, it was the top 100 individuals, and anyone who tied for that 100th place was invited to participate in round 2. For the teams, it was the top 20% of teams who performed in round 1 would be invited to participate in round 2, as well as the best teams from each CFO Act agency. So that was the plan, and we were able to put this together, submit it to the White House at the end of July, and in early August we were given the go to move forward and execute our plan. We knew we had to hit the ground running. We only had 4 months at that point to complete the competition. We were able to get our first qualifier up in 45 days. Matt, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, thanks, Harry. It was a whirlwind effort there to develop out a platform that was capable of hosting over 1,000 individuals and teams and putting them through an online qualification round. And so what we ended up doing was leaning on some software that we already had that was already being used to develop training and exercises known as TopoMojo, and pairing it with a new software development known as Gameboard, new software app that would kind of take those labs and put them together into a competition format. So, with points and leaderboards, etc. So back to TopoMojo, we have this application that's used to build really, kind of small labs for training and exercise purposes. So if you need to run somebody through a introduction to a cybersecurity tool or to some kind of scenario, then this is a good tool for that. It's now open sourced up on GitHub, and we used it because we saw this as a good model for creating a challenge, as we wanted the same kind of scope for each of our challenges, and we also wanted, one of the benefits of TopoMojo is it's very fast to get these environments deployed, and we didn't want to have, as you already mentioned, people downloading large VMs and having to run them on their own gear. So instead we hosted all of these challenges, and you were just a button click away from deploying them, having access to consoles, and ultimately using those consoles to virtual machines to solve the challenge based on the scenario that's provided in the write-up.
So they may be small virtual environments, but we were able to create some really interesting challenges there. One of my favorites from the first year is called Build the Road, where competitors were initially given access to one virtual machine, just a regular user VM, and they had to find a firewall on the subnet that they initially connected to. They had to properly configure that firewall in order to be able to see an intrusion detection system, an IDS on the other side, which they then had to properly configure in order to be able to see a router on the far side of that, which they had to properly configure in order to get to a VM on the far side, which allowed us to really explore some creative challenge development techniques, which ultimately met the needs of the executive order, which tasked us with those 10 functional areas that we were to test, which included some cyber defensive roles and tasks that are not very commonly seen in a lot of CTFs and cyber competitions, but this platform really enabled us to dig into that and execute that on a broader scale.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, we also got feedback during the development phase that we would need to have downloadable challenges as much as possible, and so many of the challenges that we built did have downloadable portions to them, and those challenges you could still solve on your own system. It usually involves some kind of artifact that was benign, but would walk you through that process. And the same artifact was then available in the hosted TopoMojo environment.
Well, it also allowed us to deploy the variants. Do you want to talk a little bit about our Infinity challenges?
Yeah. So first up, we wanted to make sure that each challenge had more than one answer. There were multiple variants deployed. Potentially deployed for each challenge. We had at least 4 variants for every President's Cup challenge in year 1, and that was just used so that if 2 people were working through the game board, that they wouldn't necessarily get the exact same answers for those challenges. We also have a technology that you talked about called Infinity style challenges, which allow procedural generation of the correct answer as the challenge is deployed. And that just means that instead of there being 4 variants, there's now infinite variants of that challenge, and no 2 deployed challenges would necessarily have the same correct answers. And that really helps us. We hope to improve upon that and build more of that into future President's Cups, because we think that is a novel way to deliver challenges that we know that you arrived at that answer through your own work.
Yeah. That first year was a really interesting experience. One of the design choices that we made for the competition in order to make it as open and accessible as possible while creating as level a playing field as we could was the use of the participation timer. So the round 1 was open for 10 days. Competitors could log in at their convenience at any point 24/7 during that 10-day period and attempt challenges. One of the things that we needed to be very mindful of, especially given our audience of fully employed federal employees and military service members, was we had to be mindful of the time that we were asking of them to participate, and we wanted to make sure that those who had more time to invest in this would not get an advantage over those who maybe had a limited amount of time to try it. So for that first year, we implemented an 8-hour timer where at any point during those 10 days, you could log in and you would start the game board, and when you started the game board, you would get an 8-hour timer that would count down. That would be your participation timer. At the end of the 8 hours, you wouldn't be able to submit any additional flags or receive any additional points.
Yeah, and I'd say that was something, even as we were just going through the development of the first round for the 2019 President's Cup, that was a new thought to me. I was accustomed to just a normal longer window and people having an opportunity to compete during that entire time. But I do think this worked out certainly the best for the President's Cup audience. And we've even gotten feedback from other competitions where they're trying to do down selects and find the best folks, that this is a good way to go about it, because then you don't advantage folks that do have more time or able to take a week off work or whatever that is.
So we found, as we started interviewing some of our competitors in year 2, that this actually factored into their strategies and how they approached the challenges. All of our teams, most of our teams that were very successful that we talked to, all had the same point of knowing when to cut and run from a challenge and avoid sinking any more time into it if you only have 8 hours to solve as many challenges as you can, which was interesting to hear. And speaking of the timing, one of the things that was very interesting was to see how that affected challenge development and our challenge development principles, just being mindful of that limited amount of time. The qualifiers the first year, round one, there were 15 challenges on the board. For round two, there were 11. We had one challenge that we dubbed Double Jeopardy because we thought it was the hardest challenge in the competition to date. It involved tasking a competitor with pulling a flag out of an encoded stream that they were given a packet capture for. They had to identify the stream, identify the type of encoding, play the traffic back in order to extract the flag. And the average solve time was 6 hours for this challenge. One of our teams solved it in 15 minutes. So this raised a ton of red flags. We manually review all of the submissions at the end of each round. And this raised some eyebrows. So we reached out to the team to confirm that this was a legitimate solve, and they gave us a write-up for how they approached the challenge and how they solved it, and it was legit. Very impressive, which just goes to show that one of the things that we kept finding over and over is no matter how much time you put into developing a challenge, there will be a competitor who will find a new or novel way to solve it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we spent a lot of time QA testing challenges. We actually had support from Pacific Northwest National Labs and Argonne National Labs to help us look at all the challenges and figure out where we think these challenges might break down and where we need to kind of beef up what's in the challenge. But even with all that, there's nothing like putting it in front of all the talented competitors in the President's Cup and seeing what they'll do with it.
Yeah, couldn't agree more, which actually leads nicely into the finals. So that first year of the finals was just such an interesting experience, putting all of this together. So we held the final round in person in 2019, actually here at our cyber lab in Arlington, Virginia. And we brought the top 10 individuals and the top 5 teams of each of 5 participants and sat them down and put them through a series of challenges. So day 1 was the individuals, and then days 2 and 3 were the teams competitions, which we'll get to momentarily. The individuals, we gave them 10 challenges. We gave them 8 hours, sat down and had at it. And our winner was actually an Air Force Academy cadet, which we were all very impressed. I mean, what a story. He's fantastic cyber professional, and we certainly wish him the best. Certainly a little bit surprising to see that, but he was the best. So he won.
Pretty great. Yeah, he actually got a shout out when he graduated from the Air Force Academy. The next year, he got a shout out from the Vice President, who was leading the commencement at that graduation. And
it's incredible.
Pretty cool story.
So for the teams competition, it was broken down into 2 days. The first day was more challenges. We had 10 unique novel challenges for them. In day 1, they had 8 hours to solve them. And then day 2, we took a bit different of an approach. We built a cyber escape room, which sort of combined physical, spatial challenges with cybersecurity problems and tasked the teams with trying to escape in 8 hours by using their teamwork skills, their cybersecurity talent, and their cleverness to find their way out. And that was quite the stressful experience.
Yeah, absolutely. We had a great time building that environment. We partnered with another group on campus known as the Entertainment Technology Center, or ETC, and they helped us put together this novel Unity-based immersive environment, kind of like a video game, coupled with cyber challenges. And so we wanted to make sure that the video game aspect of this did not dominate what we had put together. So we tested it a number of times with different groups of folks internally to make sure that they could solve that without any cyber skills at all, and it always took around the same amount of time. And so it was less than 30 minutes it would take you to get through the escape room part of this, knowing no cyber at all. And so then it just became the cyber challenges are what got the teams apart as far as determining who won and who didn't win. But it turns out that day was pretty nerve-wracking, because not only we were trying something new, but because after 4 hours, the teams were not as far along in solving the escape room as we thought they would be. And so we had some discussions on how we wanted to move forward, and we already had, the possibility of them. We had already thought about the possibility of nobody escaping, but we certainly didn't like the look of it. That we had tried to put together something new, and we really wanted to have some teams escape. And it turns out we did have a team escape at the end.
And another one that was hot on their heels that maybe another 15-20 minutes they probably would have made it out as well. One of the really interesting things that allowed us to do with the escape room is, in keeping with the intent of the executive order and the need to include non-federal participation as spectators or as participants, we live streamed the entire final day of the competition. We got two of my colleagues at CISA to narrate, Adam Brown and Bobby Thompson, who did a fantastic job providing color commentary. We were able to pull up the screens of the competitors on the live stream, and Adam and Bobby were able to talk about the tools they were using, how they were approaching the challenges, and the various techniques and what those tools are used for. It was fantastic. They did an incredible job. It's still up on YouTube. If you search President's Cup Cyber, it'll pop right up. But it was really, really interesting to be a part of.
Yeah, I think it really brought what we were doing here to a much wider audience, and did so for a cyber competition where it is difficult to create content about cyber competitions that's engaging for that period of time. And so they did a great job of explaining what was going on in a given scene, what was going on in a given scenario, and what tools were in use, how you would use those tools in real life, how they apply to this specific scenario, and ultimately provide a lot of detail that wouldn't have come if it weren't for them and their efforts that day. But we were able to put together that live stream using another team from the SCI, the broadcast media team, that was in the room right next door, the control room, and they were kind of feeding through headsets what to pay attention to, what they're gonna switch the monitors to, and we actually switched between everybody's view of the President's Cup environment. So all the teams were on systems that were deployed around this facility, and we were switching them live onto the live stream as we needed to demonstrate a specific technique or what was going on, or certainly towards the end when the excitement was happening and they were about to escape.
Yeah, it was really special to be a part of. It was really an interesting experience. But as it turns out, there's no rest for the weary. So immediately after concluding President's Cup Year 1, we started looking ahead at Year 2. What do we do to improve the competition? Where do we take it from here? For starters, we had a lot more time to prepare in Year 2, which we were grateful for, but we started right away. We knew we had to get started. We knew we had to build something compelling to follow up. We took a hard look at Year 1. We looked at what worked for us. We looked at what didn't work. We're extremely grateful to our competitors. There was a group that put together a really thoughtful AAR that we reviewed. We got a ton of feedback from a bunch of our competitors that we looked at, and it actually led to a lot of positive change in the competition, led to the development of partial credit challenges. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so for Year 1, partial credit challenges were intermixed with some of the other single answer challenges, and you just use some kind of delimiter to within what you were inputting into the challenge. Every challenge had a single field where you'd put your answer in, but some of our challenge developers would use delimiters in order to say, concatenate all these different things and put them into a single submission. But the problem with that is if you got any one part of that wrong, you got the answer wrong. You only had 3 strikes and you're out on any of the challenges. And so you might not find out why you got it wrong, because it could have been just one of these parts. And so that understandably led to competitors wanting to have something to show for spending over an hour involved in a challenge. And that's where we developed partial credit, which just uses a percentage of the overall points, applies it to each one of the different parts, and then you also know as you're submitting what you've gotten right and not right. So it allows you to then focus on the area of the challenge that you still have wrong, in hopes of correcting that before you run out of time.
Yeah, absolutely. It also led to some format changes. So we took a different approach with the individual competition for year 2. 8 hours is a long block of time for somebody to be participating in an individual competition. So we took it down to 4 hours, and we broke it into 2 separate tracks as well, to be mindful of specialty areas within cybersecurity. So track A focused on incident response and forensics. Track B focused on exploitation analysis, vulnerability assessment. And we did this in part because we were surprised at the overlap in the end when we saw who was qualifying for the final round. In fact, there were 20 slots for the final round, 10 in each individual track, and we wound up with 15 competitors because that's how much overlap was in
half of each track overlapped in the individual side. So that's pretty crazy to see that number of folks, that number of our competitors who have talent in both areas and are able to demonstrate that in the competition.
So for the qualifiers, we weren't impacted much by 2020 and the operating conditions surrounding COVID-19. The competition was entirely remote for the qualifiers, so there was minimal impact. We did end up having to postpone the final round, which executed in February 2021. A couple months ago, we wrapped President's Cup 2. We had to do it completely remote. For the first 3 days, we added an extra day for the extra individual track once we saw how much overlap there was between the 2 tracks.
Kind of unfair to ask somebody to compete in the morning and then again compete in the afternoon when the other folks in your track aren't doing the same.
That's a long day.
It is.
That's a long day.
It's a long day.
So we added an extra day. Day 1 was individuals track A, day 2 was track B, and then the last 2 days were the team competition. For the first 3 days, there was minimal impact. We were able to leverage the same technology that we used to do the qualifiers to do the final round, which certainly helped. But we were left with this big problem of how do we do the escape room? This is really key to our competition, and we certainly didn't want to abandon it. And we wanted to see what we could do to bring it into 2021 at this point in February. But we had to come up with some unique solutions to how we were going to run this, especially keeping in mind we had to have minimum hardware software requirements. We couldn't have a finalist or a final team be unable to participate because they didn't have a system with a particular operating system, or they didn't have the hardware requirements to participate. So we looked into some outside-of-the-box solutions. Do you want to talk a little bit about how we did that?
Yeah, so we knew that we were going to have our remote competitors, and we'd have roughly, actually, when it comes to the individuals finals, we had, they were doing it on the same platform as they did for the qualifiers. So they kind of fell into the same types of challenges and no real new hardware requirements there. But on that final day where we would record the live stream, we had a new client. So instead of the escape room, this year it was the Save the World scenario. And it was a weather event that impacted a municipality, and you had to go in with some remote droids and solve problems, solve cyber challenges in this environment. And so we had some pretty strict system requirements when it came to that, because Unity likes to use GPU, graphics processing units, in order to render that environment. And we couldn't, like you said, ensure that everybody already had that kind of gear. Certainly it's not going to be on their government-issued laptop. They're not going to have some beefy game-playing GPU. So instead, we enlisted the help of Microsoft Azure and their cloud computing infrastructure, specifically cloud computing instances that had GPUs attached to them, as well as some remoting technologies, a piece of software called Parsec, that allowed us to offer out the game systems to all of our remote competitors. And that also had the byproduct of allowing us to capture the screen of all those systems that were used in a live stream. And we actually did the live stream again this past February. We had, instead of 2 CISA hosts, we had 6 different CISA hosts that were spread across a 6-hour time period. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we got Bobby Thompson some help, who was kind enough to return and reprise his role as President's Cup host. And he, of course, did a fantastic job. But 8 hours is a long day to be on a live stream, so we got him some help. We had 3 teams of 2 hosts that rotated in and out over the course of the day. All of them did a fantastic job. We're extremely grateful that they volunteered to support the competition. Again, the live stream from this year's competition is up on YouTube, President's Cup Cyber. You'll be able to find it. It was a really unique experience doing it remotely. In contrast to the previous year when we were all in person, it had a different feel to it, but not really. We were all from an administrative standpoint on the back end, we had 2 separate Zoom sessions, one for the live stream and one for the challenge developers and sort of the back end competition running folks, where we would discuss the challenges, discuss the approaches of the competitors and how they were doing. And for support, we actually did something a little bit interesting this year as well by utilizing just a regular Mattermost server, which is an open source chat client. It allowed us to create rooms for the competitors, for the teams, and it gave us this direct line of communication over the course of the week, which really helped us out in making sure that the final rounds, even though they were remote, really went off without a hitch. So Matt, do you want to tell us a little bit about the scenarios that we had in the final round this year?
Yeah, absolutely. So this was as I mentioned earlier, this was the Save the World scenario, and it was split up into kind of 5 different, if you want, sub-scenarios, areas of this city that were being addressed by this team. So first up is the municipal data center. Because of the collapse of a nearby construction crane, the facility is running on generator power. While keeping within the allowed power budget, the team must get critical city services back online. The team being the Disaster Relief Task Force, or DRTF. Next up is the NGO Data Sharing Challenge. So the team pilots a mobile command center to various locations around the city. They're charged with gathering data from each NGO despite inconsistent and incomplete data sources and minimum available hardware. Now, in other bad news, this hospital is suffering a malware outbreak that is crippling their ability to see emergency room patients during this natural disaster. And you're charged with getting the malware remediated so the hospital can continue to operate properly. Now, back at the Disaster Relief Task Force Command Center, a burst pipe has affected operations. While the network has been hastily cobbled back together, the team is now tasked with restoring the security of the network. And finally, at an E911 call center, an extortion threat has been made with a deadline 45 minutes before the competition is over. The teams must analyze their threat intelligence and defend against the most likely avenue of attack. Finally, let's take a look at how the winning team, Hack You Back in Time, started off their round. The view you see now is from one of our spotter workstations. Challenge developers observed the progress of each team and provided cues to the live stream host to direct the audience's attention. Hack You Back in Time wisely decided to split up and do some recon inside of each of the scenarios. You can see them at work deploying Mourtos, which are the tool that you use to get remote access to the workstations inside the scenario, so that they can easily come back to systems as needed without spending extra time in the game client. They're also familiarizing themselves with the challenge documentation inside each scenario. That way, each challenge will have an expert to answer questions later on. That's the summary of the different scenarios, and Harry, maybe you want to talk a little bit about some interesting stuff that came after that.
So especially in 2021, with everything going on, there's a ton of interest in ransomware, and given that we had a number of scenarios that involved recovering from a ransomware attack and preventing a ransomware attack, we did have some interesting groups reach out to us looking for more information about the challenges and how they'll be available. And it is on the roadmap to release these challenges as open source so that other entities can take them and use them for training, use them for educational purposes. It's really a core tenet of the President's Cup that we make all this available. The value add here of the competition is not just while it is a key tenet of our competition to identify, challenge, and reward the best talent in the federal government, once we build these challenges and once we build these platforms, we can only use the challenges once. Once they're used, they're burned. But there's an enduring value there for training purposes, for testing purposes. So providing these out to the community is really important to us. So if you're a federal employee watching this, you can go to presidentscup.cisa.gov and you can log in and you can try any of our challenges, most of our challenges from 2019, 2020 competition. In addition, all of our stuff is up on GitHub. You can find the challenges at the CISA.gov GitHub page. You can find the platform at SEI CMU's GitHub page, and it is on our roadmap to provide the 2020 challenges as open source, as well as providing the platform used to run the escape room, which we think is really a really interesting and compelling way to deliver cybersecurity training.
Yeah, and I'll say that the traffic to those different sites definitely picks up as we're starting to enter the next year's competition. So we have people that are interested in getting involved. They hear an advertisement or something that tweaks their interest, or something that piques their interest, that they will go and seek out the resources that we have on GitHub. There's also YouTube solve videos that we've published for the 2019 challenges, so you can go back and see one way to solve those challenges and a write-up on how to do so. And so we've tried to make the most of this content in its after the competition, so that it's useful as a training aid. It's useful to get acclimated with different nice work roles and different nice tasks that are involved that the challenge has borrowed from, that the competition has borrowed from, and all of those artifacts then just become useful over time as we're constructing future President's Cups.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. One of the big lessons learned here is if you want to know if somebody can do something, you see if they can. You make them do it. So from a workforce development standpoint, from a cybersecurity training standpoint, being able to provide this as a resource and an environment for somebody to go in and try their hands at a challenge and prove that they can do something, we think there's a ton of value there, and we're excited to sort of see this shift in the broader cybersecurity community towards hands-on testing for certifications and things like that. And we certainly provide what we use for the President's Cup as a resource to hopefully enable that, provide this to organizations to build labs, to build training exercises, to build really anything. The sky is really the limit, and we're really excited to see what the community does with it.
Yeah, and on that note, we are putting together the software used for President's Cup in the form of a virtual appliance that can be downloaded right around the time of Black Hat, actually. We're going to be releasing that out to the public, and if you're interested in taking a look at the software that's used for the competition and potentially using it for other competitions of your own making, this appliance is going to allow you to do that. So keep on the lookout for that on GitHub, and we'll have the pointers to that at the conference.
All right. Well, from our cyber lab in Arlington, Virginia, this is Harry and Matt signing off. Thanks, Black Hat.
Thanks a lot.